Livestream. My name is Teacher William, and I will be taking you through today's discussion. And today, what we want to do is talking about how to create a very engaging an effective ESL environment. Okay, so if you're new to this channel, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. You can click the like button. You can share this stream to those who might need it. All right. So without wasting much time, we'll just get right into it. And I would want you to know that this stream is actually a 30-minute stream, and it's in two sections. The first session is where I'll talk a little bit on the topic. And then when I'm done, which is the second half, we will have sort of a Q&A. And during the Q&A, or even before then, while I discuss stuff, you can just leave a comment down below. You can just leave your questions, whatever you would like to know, and then I will address it as we go along. Right. So, without wasting much time, let's just get right into it. Today we're talking about how to create an engaging and effective ESL learning environment. We all know what ESL is, so we're not going to go into that. ESL stands for English as a Second Language. And what exactly is a learning environment? So essentially, a learning environment is the place where learning takes place, which is pretty straightforward. And why is it important, or why is it that we want to make sure we have the most effective, like the best form of learning environment possible? Now, I can think of two reasons. The first being that it makes it easy for the student to learn, or for the child to learn. And number two, it makes it easy as well for the teacher to teach, to carry out the content, to deliver it to the students in the most effective way, right? Things like how engaging it is, things like how much exciting, all that I would say is a secondary aspect of all this. Now, before we even get into talking about how to make the learning environment very engaging, we need to talk about something which is the types of schools, because the kind of school would actually determine how the learning environment is configured and what the teacher can do with it, right? I am in China, so the things that I will talk about are contextually based on the Chinese landscape, but I'm sure also it applies to a lot of other places. And wherever you are, this could also be helpful to you. Now, there are two kinds of schools. In China, there are two kinds of schools. The main ones, or the major ones. So number one, we have training centers. And training center is a place where students go to learn English as an extra curricular or something like that. And usually they go to main school. When they're done, they go to the training center, which is a privately owned place in most cases. Their second is a school. So number one is a training center. Number two is an actual school. So the school could be a kindergarten, it could be a primary school, it could be middle school, high school, secondary school, college, all of that. Now, even when we talk about the kindergartens, the schools in general, we can classify them into two, right? And the first category might be schools such as Montessori's, like bilingual schools, like international schools, and that sort of place. And they're not to be mistaken as the same, because sometimes they are different. They certainly have some overlaps, but there are also distinctions. So for instance, at Montessori, you would have situations where they have some form of standardized way of doing things, and they have curriculums that have been developed, and they have actually cemented the effectiveness of such a curriculum, and they multiplied over different locations and schools and stuff like that. And in a bilingual kind of environment, you have a school that decides that, okay, we're going to do English as a second language as important as we let the students learn their native language, which could be Chinese, which could be Japanese, which could be Korean, depending on where you're teaching, right? Now, sometimes in a bilingual environment, what happens is that the students come in the morning, they learn. This doesn't happen everywhere, but in some places it does. So, for instance, they learn from morning to afternoon, and after they take a break, they switch over. They learn morning to afternoon in one language, and then they switch over, and then they learn in the second language till they go home. Now, in international schools, however, these are schools that sometimes have this pedigree. They have a way of doing things. Sometimes it's a multi-site kind of school. Sometimes it's a multinational. They have locations in different places. So sometimes we have schools like North Anglia, we have schools like King School, and even in China like Zhuhong, which is in Beijing, right? So these are like one category of schools, and the other is all the others that are not Montessori bilinguals or international schools. And these schools, sometimes there's a rich folk who has enough money, opens a school and says, hey, let's add English to our curriculum. And there are some of you who are sort of stuck in an environment like that, and you're teaching in places like that. Now, the reason why it's important to actually know the different kinds of schools is because the kind of school will determine how much of importance is placed on the language that you're going to teach. So if you're teaching ESL, how much of preference they'll give to that language or the whole English teaching thing. So some schools, it's just a financial thing. Some schools, it's really important. Some schools, it's embedded in the curricula. And so this also kind of fits into my next point, which helps us understand the kinds of learning environments there are. So that's why we had to understand their kind of schools, because the kind of school would determine the learning environment that you can develop or you can have in your school. So there are two kinds of learning environments, and there's number one, which is an immersion environment, which is configured primarily for language acquisition. And I won't go much into that, but I'll just dive a little deep I'll just talk a little bit about that. And then the second one is a learning environment that is configured for language learning. And these two are not to be, mistaken, because they're not the same. Language immersion is a form of language acquisition, which comes with the immersion environment. It's a way of learning a language where you kind of pick up words and sentences in the language by just being in an environment in which it's used. But language learning is a form of learning where you learn it actively. Maybe your flashcard is put in front of you and you have to learn what is on the flashcard. And we all learn our first language through language acquisition. All right. So you're born and you're thrust into this world, which is a stage in itself, a classroom in itself, sort of, which has houses and cars and shapes and things in the home and everywhere. It's sort of an immersion environment where, as you go along through your day, people talk about stuff, people mention stuff, people show you stuff and teach you stuff. So that is sort of what an immersion environment is. But with the learning environment, it's like, okay, we bring this and we teach you that this is what this is actively. And as language learning progresses, usually even with your first or native language, you start learning it through immersion. But to dive deeper into learning anything like a language, you need to also adapt to the language learning. All right. So in the immersion environment, if you have a school in which there's an immersion environment, which sometimes applies to teachers who are homeroom teachers and stuff like that, the whole classroom is configured to go beyond a single lesson, right? So it's not just about You go in there and teach one lesson as a subject teacher and you're gone, and there's nothing else to do with your subject anymore. That is language learning configured for a single lesson. Immersion is configured in such a way that even when the teacher leaves even outside of their teaching English as a subject, English learning still goes on. So now let's progress to the next step, and we're going to talk about the environment in itself and what has to be in there. What do you need to consider? What are some of the important things that you need to look at? And it's easy to talk about a language learning environment because we all know the things that are straightforward, and these two do overlap, immersion and language learning environment. So I'm going to talk about all of it, all the things, and I'll mention what applies where as we go along. So for instance, if you're teaching in if you go to the classroom, there are certain things that they are basic things that you need, all right, for learning English as a second language. So for teaching, you're going to need something like flashcards. And this is level dependent. I'm going to stick to, for instance, I'm going to stick to kindergarten, but you can adapt this in 2 different levels, all right? So for instance, in a kindergarten, you're going to need flashcards. You're going to need a TV. You're going to need a marker and a whiteboard. And if you go to higher levels, this is even more important, like a whiteboard, a marker, stuff like that. You're going to need songs and videos. You're going to need PPTs that you use for your lesson, all right? So that applies to higher levels. Now, if you put those primary needs aside, also you need things that you might use for playing games. So if you're teaching ESL to kids, to early learners, you're gonna need things you use to play games like cones. You're gonna need hoops. You're gonna need cups. You're gonna need dices. There are these dices that come in different sizes that you can let the kids throw around, or for games. You might need magnets that you use to attach flashcards to the whiteboard, which you can also use for playing games. You're gonna need something like a basket, all right? A basket can be used to play several games. You're gonna need something like a sticky ball, which you can use. You can use ropes, all right? Now, I wouldn't go deep into games. That's a whole different topic altogether, all right? And we talked about classroom games in the previous live stream, which is on the channel. You can take a look at that. But if these are the basic needs, these are the basic things that you need for teaching in your teaching environment. So teaching materials, they are the basic needs, like flashcards, like cones, like hoops and stuff. Now, there are also things like secondary things that don't directly relate to the lesson you're teaching. So the basic ones, the basic needs, the basic things that you use, those are for a single lesson. Those are for language learning, where you have a class and you go in there and you want to do something engaging. You need to have all these materials. But there are other things that go beyond, right? So the secondary ones actually help with self-study and review, right? These are some of the materials that could help the kids actually learn by themselves when you, the teacher, you're not around, when you're not there to actively teach them a word, all right? So even when you go there as well, it even helps with review of things that you've thought in the past. So sometimes how you could do this is you can leave materials like books, right? And I'm not saying you, the class teacher, you need to do this by yourself, but you can talk to the school. You can talk to the homeroom teacher if you're not that, right? You can have books placed, English books placed in the classroom. So, for instance, sometimes you have schools that say, oh, our kids, they learn English. English is important, and there's not a single English book in the classroom. So that is a problem, right? As much as there are reading books, storybooks, in the native language, you also need to have the same in the English language. You could have, packs of flashcards put in the classroom that during the break, the kids could just go on and look at these cards themselves. They could just play with them, something that helps them engage with the learning content, even when there's not an actual lesson. All right. Now, if you're with us, you can leave a comment down below. You can talk about where you are coming from. It could be your country of origin. It could be your country of destination, where you're teaching ESL. Just leave a comment down below. Let's know where you're watching from. Also, if you have a question, you can just leave it down below, and then we will talk about it after this explanation in just a few minutes. Okay, so the next is, yes, we're talking about the secondary items, that things you can do for the learning environment. So you can have like books, like we said, you can have packs of flashcards, and you can even have like wall designs. So let's say you're teaching your students animals this semester. You've selected about 10 animals that you're teaching them. You could have all those 10 animals just put on the wall, right? When you're not there, you can, the kids can walk around, they can see it themselves. And when they see it, they will try to remember, because you have taught them those words. You learned it that day. They might even discuss these things amongst themselves. So that is really important, right? Even this could go a long way to assist you, the teacher, before you come in to try and teach the word yourself. Now, the other part is you can establish some sort of routine, right? And these routines could even apply when you're not in the classroom. It doesn't have to be you. So, for instance, you're teaching you're teaching in a training school, or you're teaching in a kindergarten or a primary school or whatever, and there's a homeroom teacher, right? Before you come in, let's say there could be a routine where every morning the teacher has to go around with the students, just review all the animals that you've learned with them. And it helps when there's a pack of flashcards in the classroom. It helps when all the animals are on the wall, right? So it just have that routine, and something that makes it repetitive, so that the kids are tested, so that the kids get to review that content regularly. All right. Now, this is the final part that I'm going to talk about, which is trying to extend the lesson beyond the lesson. In other words, trying to make sure, finding a way to have the whole school help with what you teach, and also extending it to parents. I know we're talking about the learning environment, which is the classroom, but then learning doesn't end in the classroom. So you can find a way. So, for instance, in schools, there might be drawings on the walls. There might be boards. There might be paintings of animals on the floor in the school and stuff like that. All these things could help a great deal. So when they go out to play, when they go to the playground, there could be, they could try to review. There could be sentences and stuff that the teachers could try and take them through while they are going about in the school. And for the parents, you should try and let them have all the content that is being taught for that semester. If it's colors, it's good if you make some sort of colors flashcards for them. And sometimes if you leave this to the parents, and parents don't follow through, so you could talk to your school to maybe print these flashcards and help sell it to the parents. Maybe, my school did this, and we did the flashcards. We did flashcards for all the content that we're going to teach for the whole year. And I made videos on all the flashcards, pronouncing it, doing all that. And all that was sent to the parents. So it makes it easy. Sometimes before they come to class, they have gone through some of the content, right? And let's say I have 3 words for today, and I have red, yellow, green, right? So when I teach them red, they know yellow is coming next. And some of them just say yellow before I even show up, with the yellow flashcard. So that also helps, which is the final thing we are talking about. So I'm just going to go over this really quickly. And I will say that still you can leave a comment and I'll address it as we go along. We have talked about types of schools. We said there are training centers, there are kindergarten, there are schools, training centers, and schools. And even among schools, there are two categories. We have the Montessori's, we have the bilingual schools, we have the international schools, and then we have the others where English is just an added. There's no centralized curriculum that has been specialized. Sometimes they just borrow curriculum from other school. They don't have the personally built one. And we talked about why we have to understand the type of school, which is the type of school, because the kind of importance that's assigned to ESL is dependent on the kind of school. And that would also affect the kind of learning environment that they build for you. We have talked about the language immersion, which is the language immersion environment, which is primarily structured for the sake of language acquisition. So in the classroom, everything that is done, it's not just the subject teaching, but then there's a whole lot more. And they try to even let their class teachers speak more English. And there's also the language learning environment, which is primarily structured for a single ESL lesson. So we also talked about what you need in the classroom. We've talked about basic needs. We've talked about your teaching materials like flashcards, like your TV, your Bluetooth devices for playing songs. We've talked about like your marker and maybe your songs and videos that you used to teach. We've also talked about some of the primary things you need for playing games, like your cones, your hoops and stuff. If you teach at a high level, you might have some on-screen games, you might have some PPT-based games and stuff like that. And we have also talked about like secondary needs, which are things that you can do in the classroom, how you can structure the classroom beyond the single lesson, which is put in books, put in flashcards in the classroom that the kids can interact with by themselves, maybe outside of the lesson. We have talked about stuff like designing the walls of the classroom to reflect what is being learned in that week, in that semester. And one of the things I did with my school is to put up a board that had one word, one number, one letter, one color, one shape every week, which is rotated. So we do A this week, we do B next week, we do C, and we learn it each and every day for that week. So it makes it easy for them to remember. We put one color, we learn that color all, and we review the whole week, and we have a sentence that goes with it. All right. So that's establishing a routine, establishing something that helps outside of the actual lesson. Then we've talked finally about how to take this beyond the classroom and making the whole school as a learning environment, and having designs in the school, having designs on the wall as the kids go through the passageways in the school, through the stairways everywhere. There are paintings, there are flashcards on the walls and stuff like that. And also helping helping parents acquire materials that go with what you're teaching this semester, so that they also have a way of reviewing with the student. And some of them are not really good with the English language, which is what it is. You can't blame them. So it's good to have some sort of assistance, maybe in a form of audio or video that they can listen to, or they can have the kids listen to. All right. So now is the Q&A session. If you have a comment, if you have something you want us to talk about, if you have something you want me to address, if you have a question, anything, leave a comment down below, and then we will look at it promptly. All right. So we have about 5 minutes, and I'm going to wait a bit and see what comes up. If you have a question, you can leave it. And even if you have a contribution, something you want to add, something, maybe something that I have not talked about, you can also leave that down below, and then I will talk about it. All right. So while we're waiting, just to add, with the learning environment, you the teacher, it's your job to make sure it's in a state where it's doing absolutely what you need it for, right? The classroom teachers might not, I mean, in some schools there are classroom teachers and there's a subject teacher. If you are a subject teacher, you can only advise your school to help with this, to making the learning environment, to make the learning environment go beyond just a single lesson. And if you are a homeroom teacher, which I know some people are, it's sort of your responsibility to make sure this goes really well. And I know there are parts of the schedule for the day, like circle time and stuff like that. But also try to configure the classroom to do a lot of the work passively. That is the whole idea. Try to make a lot of it very passive. All right. Okay. So I think that would be it for today. Thank you very much for joining this one. This will be left on the channel for reference anytime you need it, and for those who might want to watch it later. Okay, so thank you for being a part of this live stream. I will see you in the next one. Bye.